And now we are going to look at early English as well as the Dutch. This is in your chapter 1, as you can see here. So when we're looking at early English attempts, let's start all the way back in 1497. This would be when England was under King Henry VII. Under him, we're going to see things like John Cabot is going to explore eastern Canada, but there's not really any follow-up to this, mostly because there's a lack of funds, because there's a lack of interest amongst wealthy subjects. The other thing is that after that, really, England has a ton of religious problems at home. This is really going to start with King Henry VIII. You probably know him as the one that has like the many wives: Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and then Catherine Parr. So lots of wives. And the thing is, King Henry VIII, he was married to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and he wanted to divorce her because she had not given him any male heirs. The thing is, he was Catholic, and Catholics don't allow for divorce. So what King Henry VIII did was say, fine, I'm not Catholic anymore. And he converted to Protestantism. And he basically established the Church of England, which is the Anglican church that he was the head of, and said, I can now divorce my wife. But this basically forces everyone in England to also convert to Protestantism. So you can imagine the upheaval a little bit with this. The thing is, King Henry, even after all these wives, he never gets his male heir. And so his eldest daughter, Mary, takes over the throne in 1553. Well, Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, and so she's Catholic. And so she forces the entire nation to go back to being Catholic. This was actually a very bloody process. This is, she gets the nickname Bloody Mary, and you've probably heard of the childhood game, Bloody Mary in the mirror and everything like that. This is actually referencing her because she actually killed quite a few different people for refusing to convert back. The thing is, Mary dies without an heir, and so her little sister, Elizabeth I, takes over the throne in 1558. Well, Queen Elizabeth I is committed to being Protestant, and she converts the entire nation back to Protestantism, and the Church of England that is still reigns today and everything like that. She really is the queen that brings stability back to England. With her, we get a renewal of interest for colonization, partly because of, wealthy reasons, political advantage, and then just, being a Protestant crusade versus, the Catholic crusade that we've seen with like the Reconquista and the Spanish and everything there. However, when she is initially looking to colonize, the first target, as you can see on this map, is not the Americas. In fact, it is Ireland, that nation just west of the United Kingdom. The thing is, Ireland, the colonization of Ireland actually was something that happened between like 1536 through 1691. So it starts under King Henry VIII and it goes on for quite some time and everything like that. But basically, the reason this was the English's first target of colonization was because they saw Ireland, which was predominantly Catholic, as a potential target for Spain to try to take over and then invade England from there. And so basically England is preemptively taking over Ireland instead. And there's a lot of attention to this day about this. Ireland itself is now split up into Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland that is a part of the UK today. There's a whole lot of history there, but a lot of this goes back all the way to this time period. Basically, there's going to be a series of expeditions, though, that they will destroy Irish villages. The English will slaughter the inhabitants there. And in fact, a lot of the veterans of these campaigns are going to then later take part in a lot of the New World colonization with England. And they draw on their Irish experience for their guidance, just like we saw with like the Spanish and the Reconquista veterans of war then going on over in the New World as well. There's a lot of comparisons. We see like a lot of primary sources that would compare the Irish savages to Native American savages and everything. There's frequently, they observe, similarities between these two groups. A lot of times when, for instance, the English would meet like Native American resistance eventually, they would recall their like how they dealt with the Irish and claim that this like native savagery had to be put down with brutal suppression for, the English to really work out. The thing is, we also see the English are going to be influenced by ideas of colonial settlement based off of what they do with the Irish. When they came to Ireland, they would like set up these plantations, and basically what they would do is they would seize Irish lands, and then they would go on to import like good Protestant tenants from England and Scotland to farm the land. And so they basically would exclude the native Irish from these land holdings. This really is, they're going to follow this precedent when they then go on to establish plantations over in the New World as well, that they just want to exclude the natives from the land a lot of times. We also do see Queen Elizabeth is going to authorize several different exploratory voyages between 1576 and 78. A lot of this is about finding a northwest passage to Asia. So they're still looking beyond the Americas. There's going to be people like Martin Frobisher are going to lead these. In fact, he brought back fool's gold, so it didn't quite work out there. What the English really figure out is that they have the best luck with having basically English privateers raid Spanish ships and New World ports for gold and silver. And so these are going to be individuals that you might have heard of, like John Hawkins and Francis Drake. This is like in like the 1570s. The thing is, these English privateers, also known as sea dogs, were not initially supported by Queen Elizabeth because it's going to cause conflict between the English and the Spanish, because basically these English privateers are stealing gold from the Spanish. Initially, she didn't support them because of the conflicts this would cause, but then she saw how much money they would bring out, and then she started kind of like funding them under the table and not stopping them, and yeah. And so all of this is going to alienate the Spanish. And so the Spanish King Philip by the 1580s is very frustrated with this. And so he decides to attack England. Basically, King Philip of Spain is going to send practically like everything that can sail into battle with the English. But on the way, what's crazy about all this, so think about like all the problems England's had compared to all the problems Spain has had, which is not the same caliber at all. Spain ends up losing this battle. The Spanish Armada in 1588 is defeated by the English, which is a huge deal. Now, there's several reasons for this. One of them includes that basically there was a really bad storm right before the battle, and this damaged a lot of the Spanish ships and everything. But what it basically means with the defeat of Spain, Spain no longer controls the Atlantic, and this basically opens up that it becomes a lot easier for other European countries to colonize over in the New World. So, England colonizing over in the New World, over in the Americas. The thing is, there are a lot of concerns in England that there's this huge increase in population at this time that might threaten social order, and then there's just economic changes making it difficult for some people to support themselves. And so a lot of people are going, oh, the solution to all this is we need to colonize the New World. One of these individuals is actually Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who was a veteran of the Irish Wars. There we go. He wanted New World settlement, and he actually wanted to offer free land to people who were willing to move. Just remember, huge deal, because then you have, political influence and everything. In 1578, so keep in mind this is 10 years before the defeat of the Spanish Armada, he got permission. However, it took him 5 years to organize the expedition to Newfoundland. He didn't like the site, and so he decided to look for a more favorable site further south, and he was lost at sea. So, didn't quite work out for him. However, his half-brother then took over this idea. This would be Sir Walter Raleigh, who was also a veteran of the Irish Wars. He takes over in 1585. He is going to send men, actually, in that time to set up a colony at Roanoke Island. The thing is, The men he sends are mostly soldiers, and they basically saw themselves as too good to like grow their own food, and they basically expected the local Native American inhabitants to feed them, which clearly alienates them, so much so that the local Chief Wingina would organize a native resistance against these English colonists, and the English colonists killed him. The colonists would end up returning to England in 1586 after basically finding no treasure, so priorities here, and after being exhausted by a harsh winter. Now, there are several successes from this particular expedition. It's more on an individual basis, though. It'd be things like Thomas Harriot would identify plants and animals in the area, so we got some good primary sources about the local flora and fauna, things like that. And John White, another individual, would draw maps of the land as well as paint a series of watercolors depicting the natives and coastal landscapes. So once again, some primary sources. Under Sir Walter Raleigh, though, we're going to see a second try, actually this time in 1587. Oh, keep in mind, 1588 is the Spanish Armada's defeat, so we're coming closer to that. This time, actually, John White is going to be the leader of the expedition. However, he would basically dump the settlers at Roanoke, including women, for the first time, as well as children, so that he could go on to pursue Spanish ships, because that's how you really make your money. He did wait around long enough for his granddaughter to be born, and in fact, his granddaughter was the first English child born in America. But then he chases after Spanish ships, and then he sails to England for supplies. The problem is he gets back to England, and what happens is the Spanish Armada's attack, and so any kind of relief expedition to the Roanoke colony is delayed because of this. And in fact, they can't send any relief ships back until 1590. When they do, the colony that they find is deserted, and the only thing that they had was a word left on a post, as you can see here in this picture, that was Croatoan. No Roanoke colonists were ever found. Now, what happened to them remains a mystery to this day, but generally most historians agree most likely many of them died, and others would have joined local Native American tribes in order to survive. Please don't believe all the things on the History Channel that might say, oh, it's aliens and stuff. What do they learn, though, from all this is basically, A, you need adequate funding. You need to have relief expeditions, everything like that. They also learned soldiers, not necessarily the best colonists. And then on some level, they learned that they need to maintain good relations with the Native Americans. How much they learned that is questionable when we go into English colonies later on. However, what this really means is by the end of the 16th century, there is no permanent English settlement in the New World. You can see here on this map exactly where the lost colony of Roanoke was. And this is important because later we'll get into Jamestown. And then really quick, I want to look at the Dutch. The thing is, the Dutch, this is going to be established under the West Indian Company, and it's going to establish New Netherland. The first permanent Dutch settlers actually come in 1624. They're going to set up basically a fur trading post at Fort Orange, which is actually near modern-day Albany, as you can see on this map. Then in 1626, we have another company of Protestant refugees establish New Amsterdam, basically on Manhattan Island. They're very similar to the French. It's a lot more about focusing on fur trade with the local natives. They also become this magnet for religious refugees from Europe. It's going to lack numbers, but what's really interesting about it is that there's a ton of ethnic diversity. You see settling in these Dutch colonies, you know, Dutch, German, French, English, Swedish, Portuguese, African settlers, although many of them were slaves, Calvinists, Lutherans, Quakers, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, all in one place. And on one hand, this is really interesting this early on in what's going to be, you know, American history, but it also ended up hindering a sense of community here. They have generally a pretty good relationship with the local natives, such as the Iroquois, partly because so much of their economy is going to be based off of trade, and especially fur trade. And in fact, they're going to be rather profitable, though they don't compare to other investments of the Dutch Empire. That being said, even though they had a pretty good relationship, there are going to be some individuals that caused some problems with Native Americans, such as like in 1645, a governor is going to order the massacre of an encampment of Indian refugees who refused to pay tribute. In fact, they threw Native American babies in a river, and then when parents went in after them, they wouldn't let anyone escape the river, basically forcing them to drown. We also see, like, in 1655, Governor Sky Savant, antagonized a local Native American tribe and seized a small Swedish colony where they had been trading previously. These are kind of blimps, but also keep in mind, like, even with these things, this is considered a pretty good relationship with the Native Americans.